The transmutation circle should not have failed. Shou Tucker knelt in the basement laboratory, hands trembling as he traced the final sigil. 3 years of research compressed into chalk lines and desperate mathematics. The array glowed with sickly purple light pulsing like a diseased heart. He had checked every calculation 17 times. Every component aligned perfectly with the forbidden texts he had stolen from the military archives. This time would be different. This time Nina would return. He pressed both palms against the outermost ring and channeled his will into the pattern. Energy surged through the geometric pathways, building toward the necessary resonance. The air grew thick and oily. Shadows gathered in the corners of the room, watching with something approaching hunger. Tucker felt the moment the formula broke. The circle's light twisted from purple to bile green. The geometric precision he had labored over warped like melting wax. A sound split the air. Not quite thunder, not quite screaming. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the concrete floor in fractal patterns that hurt to perceive. He tried to pull his hands away. They would not move. The chalk lines beneath his palms had become brands searing into his flesh. The pain was immediate and absolute. The basement wall tore open. Not physically. The stones remained intact, but something behind them yawned wide. A wound in reality itself gaped before him, bleeding colors that had no names. Tucker's mind recoiled from what he saw within that impossible depth. Geometries that should not exist, angles that devoured light, a vastness that screamed with the voices of the unborn and the eternally damned. The warp recognized him. It knew what he had done. Every chimera he had created, every life he had twisted into abomination. The desperation that drove his hands, the selfishness that let him sacrifice his daughter. The void beyond the torn wall knew all of it, and it was hungry. Gravity inverted. Tucker's stomach lurched as he was yanked forward. His hands finally tore free from the circle, leaving strips of burned skin on the concrete. He had one moment to scream before the rift swallowed him whole. The transition was not instantaneous. Tucker fell through layers of existence, each one peeling away another fragment of his sanity. His body stretched and compressed in ways flesh was never meant to endure. Bones bent without breaking, skin pulled taut and then loose. His lungs forgot how to process air. Time became a suggestion rather than a constant. And through it all, he saw her. Nina appeared in the maelstrom, no longer the chimera he had created, but the child she had been. Brown hair and pigtails, a sundress yellow as summer wheat. She smiled at him with perfect trust, the way she had before he destroyed everything. Then her face began to melt. The flesh ran like candle wax, revealing muscle and bone beneath. Her smile remained even as her jaw unhinged and dropped away. The sundress dissolved into blood and viscera. She reached for him with hands that sprouted too many fingers, each one ending in Alexander's claws. Tucker tried to look away. The warp would not permit it. His eyelids had fused open. 1,000 Ninas surrounded him. Some were chimeras, twisted amalgamations of girl and dog. Others were corpses in varying stages of decay. Several were inside-out organs, pulsing in the void. One was made entirely of mouths, each one asking why he had done this to her. They all spoke in unison. "Daddy, it hurts." The words carved through his mind like broken glass. Tucker opened his mouth to apologize, to beg forgiveness, to explain that he had only wanted to keep his certification, to maintain their home, to give her the life she deserved. The warp filled his throat with something that was not air. He choked on the taste of copper and rot. The Ninas circled closer. Their voices layered over one another in a cacophony of childish pain. Each spoke a different memory. The day he had first drawn the circle that would consume her. The moment she realized what was happening. The hours she spent as a chimera, aware but unable to speak her horror. The instant Scar's alchemy destroyed what remained of her consciousness. "Make it stop, Daddy. Please make it stop." Tucker reached for the closest apparition. His fingers passed through her like smoke. She giggled a sound like breaking glass and pressed her dissolving face against his. The contact burned worse than any acid. Where her skin touched his memories, transferred. He experienced her death from her perspective. The transmutation. The agony of flesh rewriting itself. Bones merging with canine skeleton. Vocal cords stretching to accommodate new sounds. Consciousness fragmenting between human thought and animal instinct. The desperate hope that her father would reverse it. The slow understanding that he would not. That he could not. That this was forever. Tucker screamed. The warp drank the sound and returned it, amplified 1,000-fold. More figures emerged from the swirling chaos. His wife stumbled forward, still wearing the shape of the first chimera he had created. Her body was a grotesque fusion of woman and beast, starved to skeletal thinness. She had refused to eat after the transmutation, had chosen death over existence as his creation. Now she stared at him with eyes that held nothing but contempt. "You did this," she said. Not an accusation, a simple statement of fact. Other shapes manifested in the maelstrom. Failed experiments from his early research. Animals he had fused and discarded when they did not speak. Servitors and test subjects from laboratories he had never visited, drawn to him by the resonance of his crimes. The warp was showing him everyone who had suffered for the advancement of his selfish alchemy. An entity coalesced from the chaos. It had no true form, only the suggestion of vastness. Eyes that were windows into deeper voids. A presence that felt like judgment condensed into something approaching consciousness. It studied Tucker with the dispassionate interest of a vivisectionist examining a particularly interesting specimen. The entity did not speak. It simply reached out and touched Tucker's forehead with something that might have been a finger. Every death he had caused replayed in his mind simultaneously. He experienced each transmutation from the victim's perspective, felt their confusion as their bodies betrayed them, knew their despair as they realized what he had made them become, lived through their final moments over and over in an endless recursive loop. Time lost meaning. Tucker existed in that moment for seconds or centuries. When the entity finally withdrew, something fundamental had changed in him. A mark had been branded into his soul, invisible but indelible. He had been claimed, tagged, set aside for future use. The warp expelled him. Tucker fell through layers of unreality, tumbling end over end, through geometries that made his eyes bleed. The temperature rose. Gravity reasserted itself with brutal finality. He slammed into solid ground hard enough to crack ribs. The impact drove what little breath remained from his lungs. He lay gasping on scorched metal lungs burning as they tried to process air thick with ash and chemicals. The surface beneath him was hot enough to raise blisters on exposed skin. Somewhere in the distance, machinery screamed with voices that were almost human. Tucker forced his eyes open. The sky above was the color of infected wounds, shot through with veins of toxic green. Towering spires of blackened metal rose in every direction, connected by bridges that defied structural logic. Furnaces the size of cathedrals belched smoke into the polluted atmosphere. The air tasted of blood and burning copper. Figures moved through the industrial wasteland, humanoid shapes that walked with mechanical precision. As Tucker's vision cleared, he saw they were not entirely human. Flesh had been replaced with crude machinery. Limbs ended in tools rather than hands. Cables and tubes protruded from open torsos, leaking fluids that might have been blood or coolant. One of them noticed him. The servitor's head swiveled with a grinding of gears. Empty eye sockets regarded Tucker with the attention of a predator recognizing prey. It emitted a burst of binary cant, harsh and rhythmic. Other figures turned in response. Tucker tried to stand. His legs would not support him. The fall through the warp had damaged something fundamental in his nervous system. He managed to push himself to his hands and knees before collapsing again. The servitors surrounded him. Metal hands gripped his arms and hauled him upright. He hung limp between them, too weak to resist. They dragged him across the scorching metal, his feet leaving trails of blood where the heat burned through his shoes. A structure loomed ahead, larger than the others. Cathedral and factory merged into something that served neither God nor industry, but some darker synthesis of both. The servitors carried him through corroded blast doors into corridors lit by flickering lumens. The walls were lined with alcoves containing things that had once been human, now rendered down to component parts and rebuilt according to alien logic. They brought him to a chamber vast enough to contain a warship. The ceiling disappeared into darkness. Arrays of surgical equipment hung from chains swaying gently in the thermic currents. Operating tables stretched in orderly rows, most of them occupied by subjects in various stages of augmentation. At the chamber's center stood a figure that made Tucker's remaining sanity cringe. The Magos was more machine than man. Mechadendrites sprouted from his back like mechanical serpents, each tipped with a different instrument of dissection. His face was a brass mask with a single red lens where his left eye should have been. Hydraulics hissed with each movement. The smell of sacred oils mixed with the copper tang of blood. Magos Xylar Varn regarded Tucker with the interest of a craftsman discovering new materials. "A gift from the warp itself," Varn said. His voice emerged from a voxcaster implanted in his throat, stripped of all emotion save clinical curiosity. "How fortunate." The servitors threw Tucker onto an empty table. Restraints snapped shut around his wrists and ankles with mechanical precision. He tried to speak, to beg, to explain. His throat produced only a wheeze. Varn leaned close. The red lens of his eye flickered as it scanned Tucker's body, cataloging injuries and mapping potential uses. "You will serve the Omnicia," the Magos said. "Your flesh will be repurposed, your knowledge extracted. Your pain will advance our understanding of biological limits." A mechadendrite descended, tipped with a drill bit that spun with a keening whine. "Let us begin." The drill touched Tucker's shoulder, and the nightmare truly started. The drill bit pierced skin and muscle with clinical precision. Tucker's scream echoed through the vaulted chamber, joining the chorus of other subjects undergoing augmentation. Magos Varn did not pause. The mechadendrite drove deeper, grinding against bone with a sound that made Tucker's teeth ache in sympathy. "Fascinating," Varn said. His voxcaster rendered the word flat and emotionless. "Your nervous system displays unusual resistance to shock. The warp has altered your physiology in subtle ways." Tucker tried to form words. His tongue felt thick and useless. The restraints cut into his wrists as he thrashed against them. Another mechadendrite descended, this one tipped with a syringe the length of his forearm. The needle punched through his sternum and injected something cold directly into his chest cavity. The pain stopped, not because the drilling ceased. Varn's tool continued its work, carving through Tucker's shoulder blade to access the spine beneath. But Tucker's body no longer registered the damage as agony. Instead, he felt every sensation with perfect, horrible clarity. The vibration of metal against bone, the heat of friction, the wet sounds of tissue parting. His mind processed it all without the mercy of unconsciousness or the buffer of shock. "Better?" Varn said. "You will remain aware throughout the process. Observation of conscious subjects yields superior data." The Magos withdrew the drill and selected a different tool. This one resembled a miniature bone saw, its blade moving too fast to see clearly. He applied it to Tucker's exposed vertebrae. The sensation of his own spine being cut open while fully aware drove Tucker past the edge of coherent thought. He existed only as a vessel for sensation, unable to process anything beyond the immediate violation of his body. Cables slithered into the surgical field like metal serpents. Varn guided them with practiced efficiency, threading them between Tucker's vertebrae. Each cable terminated in a cluster of needles that pierced the spinal cord at precise intervals. Tucker felt them enter his nervous system, foreign objects invading the core of his being. "These will serve dual purposes." Varn explained, his tone suggesting he was documenting the procedure for later review. "Data extraction and behavioral modification. Your knowledge of biological transmutation will be most useful." Currents surged through the cables. Tucker's back arched against the restraints. Every muscle in his body contracted simultaneously. His jaw clenched hard enough to crack a molar. The current was not merely electricity. It carried something else, an invasive presence that rifled through his memories like pages in a book. Images flashed through his mind in reverse chronology. Nina's transmutation. His wife's transformation, years of failed experiments, the desperation that drove him to ever greater atrocities. Varn was stealing his knowledge directly from his brain. "Intriguing methodology," the Magos said. "Crude by mechanicum standards, but effective for your limited resources. The fusion of disparate genetic material through alchemical catalysts. We can improve upon this foundation." The current ceased. Tucker hung limp in the restraints, gasping for air. Drool ran from the corner of his mouth. The cables remained embedded in his spine, subtle pressure reminding him of their presence with each breath. Varn moved to a console mounted on the chamber wall. His mechadendrites interfaced with the machine downloading the extracted data. Tucker watched through blurred vision as his life's work was transferred to the Magos' cogitators. Every equation, every failure, every success purchased with innocent blood. "Your daughter," Varn said, without looking back. "The transmutation was imperfect, but showed promise. You will recreate this work." Tucker found his voice. It emerged as a croak, barely human. "No. Please, I can't." "Incorrect assessment." Varn turned his red lens, flickering. "You possess both knowledge and motivation. The warp has ensured you cannot die easily. Therefore you can and will comply." A section of the chamber floor opened. Servitors emerged from below, carrying a gurney between them. The body strapped to it was barely recognizable as human. Female, judging by bone structure, but the flesh had been flayed away in systematic strips. Muscles glistened wetly in the harsh lumen light. The subject's chest still rose and fell. Somehow, impossibly, she lived. "Raw materials are plentiful," Varn said. "Failed augmentation subjects, heretics, those who displeased their masters. Your task is to make them useful through fusion with captured Xenos specimens." More servitors brought cages. The creatures within defied easy classification. Some were clearly canine, though twisted by mutation into forms that barely resembled their ancestors. Others were alien, all chitin and too many limbs. One cage held something that might have been human once before infection or possession had rendered it into a mewling horror. Tucker shook his head weakly. I won't. I can't do that again. Varn's mechadendrites coiled around Tucker's skull. Needle tips pressed against his temples, not quite breaking skin. Your cooperation is not requested. It is required. Refuse and I will stimulate the pain centers of your brain directly. You will experience agony beyond anything the physical world can provide. Continuously. Without end. The needles pressed harder. Tucker felt them pierce flesh, scraping against bone. Or, Varn continued, you may comply. Work will distract you from memory. Success will be rewarded. And when you have proven your value, I will provide resources to recreate what you lost. Tucker's breath caught. What? Your daughter? The Magos released his grip mechadendrites, withdrawing. The transmutation you performed was flawed, but reversible with proper technology. Serve me, and I will help you restore her. The Mechanicum has achieved feats your primitive alchemy cannot comprehend. It was a lie. Tucker knew it was a lie. Nothing in Varn's flat, vox-castered tone suggested mercy or compassion. The Magos saw him as a tool, nothing more. Any promise was merely another form of restraint, psychological rather than physical. But Tucker was a desperate man, and desperate men clung to lies when truth offered only despair. What do you want me to do? Varn's response came immediately, as if the question had been anticipated. Create chimeras suitable for combat. Fusions that retain intelligence while gaining predatory advantages. Your alchemical approach combined with our surgical precision should yield superior results to either method alone. The servitors unstrapped Tucker from the surgical table. His legs barely supported his weight. The cables still protruded from his spine, trailing behind him like technological entrails. When he tried to remove them, current pulsed through his nervous system in warning. The message was clear. The implants were permanent. Varn guided him to a workstation on the chamber's periphery. The space was equipped with alchemical apparatus alongside mechanicum tools. Transmutation circles had been etched into the metal floor. Vials of unknown substances lined steel shelves. Everything he would need to resume his terrible work. Begin with simple fusions, Varn instructed. Canine specimens merged with failed servitors. Once you demonstrate competence, we will progress to more complex combinations. Tucker stared at the flayed woman on the gurney. She had not moved since the servitors brought her in. He wondered if she was conscious, if some fragment of awareness remained trapped in that ruined body, begging for death that would not come. He had become that which he feared most, not the monster who created chimeras, but the tool used by greater monsters to perpetuate atrocity. The first fusion took 3 hours. Tucker worked mechanically, hands moving through familiar patterns. Draw the circle. Position the subjects. Calculate the necessary resonance. His alchemy was crude compared to what he had practiced in his own laboratory, limited by unfamiliar materials and the constant distraction of pain. The cables in his spine sent periodic jolts through his nervous system, keeping him alert and compliant. The woman and the canine specimen were placed within the circle's boundary. Tucker activated the array with a gesture channeling energy through geometric pathways. The transmutation began with a flash of sickly light. Flesh merged and rewrote itself according to new design. Bone structures shifted to accommodate hybrid form. The woman's screams merged with animal howls, creating a sound that belonged to neither species. Tucker watched with dead eyes as his hands once again destroyed life in pursuit of unholy creation. When the light faded, something new stood in the circle. It was larger than a human, hunched and quadrupedal. The woman's face remained partially intact, stretched across the elongated skull. Canine musculature rippled beneath skin that showed both fur and human texture in patches. The creature's eyes held terrible awareness, trapped between two states of being, and fully cognizant of the horror. It looked at Tucker and spoke with the woman's voice. "Kill me." Varn stepped forward, examining the chimera with evident satisfaction. Adequate for initial attempt. The subject retained cognitive function and vocalization. This confirms your methodology's viability. The chimera lunged at Tucker. Chains snapped taut, restraining it before claws could reach his throat. It strained against the bonds, howling with rage and despair. Tucker saw himself reflected in its eyes. Another victim, another life ruined by his cowardice. "Continue," Varn said. 3 more specimens await processing. I expect completion within the standard work cycle. Tucker turned to the next gurney. The body strapped to it was male, already partially augmented with crude mechanical limbs. The next cage held something serpentine and covered in scales. He began to draw a fresh circle, hands shaking. Behind him, the first chimera continued its futile struggle against the chains. Its pleas for death echoed through the chamber, joining the ambient sounds of machinery and distant suffering. Tucker worked through the night, or what passed for night, in the Forge world's eternal industrial twilight. Each fusion was a small death. Each success drove him further into despair. By the time he completed the 4th chimera, he no longer flinched at their screams. Varn observed every procedure, extracting data and refining parameters. When Tucker finally collapsed, the Magos permitted him a brief rest. Servitors dragged him to a cell no larger than a coffin, barely tall enough to sit upright. The cables in his spine connected to ports in the cell wall, preventing any attempt at removal. Tucker lay in darkness, listening to the sounds of the Forge world. Metal grinding against metal. The screams of subjects undergoing unwanted transformation. The hymns of tech priests praising their corrupted omnissiah. And beneath it all, quieter but persistent, the sound of chimeras begging for death that would not come. He had traded one nightmare for another. The warp's torment had been spiritual. This was visceral and immediate. Both were infinite in their own way. Sleep would not come. Every time Tucker closed his eyes, he saw Nina's face. Not as she had been, but as the chimeras he now created. 1,000 variations of the same atrocity, each one bearing his daughter's accusing stare. The cell door opened. A servitor thrust a tray through the gap. Nutrient paste and recycled water. Food to maintain his body's function, nothing more. Tucker forced himself to eat. Starvation would be too merciful an escape. Through the open door, he glimpsed the work chamber. More gurneys had arrived while he slept. More subjects waiting for his hands to transform them into weapons. The assembly line of horror would continue indefinitely, each fusion another mark against his already condemned soul. Varn's voice crackled through a voxcaster embedded in the cell wall. Rest period concludes in 1 hour. Prepare for accelerated production schedule. Lord Vex requires combat-ready specimens within 3 cycles. Your cooperation ensures progress toward your daughter's restoration. The lie sustained him, even as it poisoned him. Tucker clung to the false promise because it was all he had left. The alternative was accepting that Nina was gone forever, that his crimes had been for nothing, that he would spend eternity creating new victims to replace those he had already destroyed. He finished the nutrient paste and waited for the hour to pass. When the servitors came to retrieve him, Tucker followed without resistance. There was nowhere to run, nothing to escape to. He was a tool in the hands of those who had perfected the art of making tools from human flesh. The work chamber awaited. Fresh subjects, new specimens for fusion. Another day of turning living beings into abominations. Tucker picked up the chalk and began to draw. The chimeras learned to hate him. Tucker stood before the containment cells, watching his creations through reinforced glass. 17 fusions completed over 6 work cycles. Each one bore the mark of his alchemy merged with mechanicum augmentation. Each one stared back with awareness that transcended animal instinct. They knew what he had done to them. The first chimera, the woman canine fusion, had stopped begging for death. Now, she simply watched Tucker with eyes that promised violence. Her body had adapted to its new configuration, muscles growing denser as Varn's programming took hold. The human face stretched across her skull had frozen into a permanent snarl. "She remembers her children," Varn said, appearing beside Tucker without sound. The augmentation preserved her memory engrams. "She knows they wait for her return. She understands this will never happen." Tucker flinched. He had not asked for that detail, did not want to know the lives he had erased with his transmutations. "Why tell me this? Context improves performance." Varn's lens flickered red in the dim light. "Emotional investment in your work yields superior results. You must understand what you create to create it well." The cell beside the first chimera held a more recent fusion. Male torso merged with something arachnoid, 8 legs sprouting from a human spine that had been elongated and reinforced with steel. The man's arms ended in blade-like appendages, surgical implements grafted directly to bone. His face retained enough humanity to show expression. Currently, that expression was pure loathing. He tapped one bladed limb against the glass when Tucker met his gaze. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate, a promise of what would happen if the barriers ever failed. Further down the row, other chimeras exhibited their own variations. A woman merged with reptilian DNA scales erupting through skin in geometric patterns. Her tongue flickered between lips that no longer fully closed over elongated fangs. 2 subjects fused into a single mass, their consciousness shared between one body, constantly fighting for dominance. A child, or what had been a child, now sporting mechanical augmentations and the musculature of something bred for slaughter. Tucker turned away from that last cell. The child watched him go with eyes that understood betrayal on a fundamental level. "Today's work involves refinement," Varn announced. Combat trials revealed weaknesses in psychological conditioning. The specimens retain excessive individuality. They must be reprogrammed to accept their purpose. Tucker felt the cables in his spine twitch. "What does that mean? You will enter the cells. Physical contact allows alchemical adjustment of their neurological patterns. The process requires proximity." Every survival instinct Tucker possessed screamed against the idea. "They'll kill me." "Unlikely. The warp's mark has rendered you remarkably difficult to destroy permanently. They may damage you severely, but death will elude you." Varn's tone suggested this was a beneficial feature rather than a horror. "Pain will motivate compliance, both yours and theirs." The first cell door unsealed with a hiss of pressurized air. The woman canine chimera tensed muscles coiling beneath hybrid flesh. Tucker stepped into the cell, and the door sealed behind him. The space was barely 3 meters square, designed for containment rather than comfort. Blood stained the corners where the chimera had tested the walls with her claws. She circled him slowly, never taking her eyes from his face. The human intelligence trapped in that altered form calculated angles and vulnerabilities. Tucker raised his hands in a placating gesture, knowing it was useless. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The chimera struck. Claws raked across Tucker's chest, shredding fabric and flesh in a single swipe. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall hard. She was on him before he could recover, jaws closing around his shoulder. Teeth designed for tearing meat punched through muscle and scraped against bone. Tucker screamed. The sound was swallowed by the cell's acoustic dampening. No one would come to help. This was part of the process. Varn watched from outside recording data as Tucker's creation savaged him. The chimera released his shoulder and went for his throat. Tucker managed to get an arm up in time. Fangs sank into his forearm instead, grinding against radius and ulna. Blood poured from the wounds, slicking the floor. The chimera shook her head like a dog worrying prey, trying to tear the limb free entirely. Through the agony, Tucker forced himself to focus. The transmutation circle was already drawn, etched into the cell floor in lines too fine to see without close inspection. He pressed his free hand against the nearest line and channeled what little will he could muster. Alchemical energy surged through the pattern. It caught the chimera mid-shake, locking her muscles in place. She could not release Tucker's arm or pull away. They were frozen together, predator and creator, locked in grotesque embrace. Tucker began the adjustment process. It was not healing or reversal. Those remained beyond his capability. Instead, he reached into the chimera's neural pathways and twisted them according to Varn's specifications. Suppressed the parts of her consciousness that remembered family. Amplified the instincts that served combat purposes. Turned her rage away from Tucker and towards targets the magos would designate. He felt her awareness fragment as he worked. The woman who had been someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's friend, was buried beneath layers of conditioning. Not destroyed. Never destroyed. Just pressed down into the depths where her screams would not interfere with function. When Tucker released the circle's power, the chimera staggered back. She looked at her claws, now dripping with Tucker's blood, as if seeing them for the first time. Confusion replaced hatred in her eyes. Then even that faded, leaving only the blank readiness of a weapon waiting to be aimed. Tucker collapsed against the wall, cradling his mauled arm. The wounds were already closing, flesh knitting together with unnatural speed. The warp's mark at work, ensuring he could not escape through injury or blood loss. The cell door opened. Servitors entered and dragged Tucker out. The chimera watched him go, with empty eyes, no longer recognizing him as the architect of her damnation. 16 cells remained. Varn allowed Tucker no respite. The moment the servitors released him, the next cell opened. The arachnoid fusion waited within blade limbs, scraping against the walls in anticipation. This one was faster than the first. Tucker barely crossed the threshold before bladed appendages sliced into his legs. He went down hard, and the chimera was on top of him instantly. 8 legs pinned him to the floor while the blade arms rose and fell in rapid succession. Each strike carved through flesh with surgical precision, targeting nerve clusters and major blood vessels. The pain was exquisite and comprehensive. Tucker's vision went white, then red, then began to fade toward black. But unconsciousness would not come. The warp's mark kept him awake through it all, processing every nerve signal with perfect clarity. He activated the circle. The chimera froze mid-strike, blade poised above Tucker's heart. Tucker performed the neural adjustment through a haze of agony, his hands shaking so badly he could barely maintain contact with the floor. This fusion required deeper changes. The man's consciousness was more resistant, fighting Tucker's intrusion with desperate fury. Tucker felt the chimera's memories as he suppressed them. A wife, twin daughters, a trade he had practiced with pride before the mechanicum took him. Tucker pressed those memories down into silence and moved on to the next cell. The pattern repeated with variations. Some chimeras attacked immediately. Others waited, hoping to catch him off guard. One tried to bargain, offering cooperation in exchange for mercy Tucker could not provide. Another wept as it tore into him, apologizing between bites. By the 10th cell, Tucker no longer felt pain as a distinct sensation. It had become his default state, a constant background noise against which individual injuries barely registered. His body was a map of wounds in various stages of healing. Claw marks, bite wounds, lacerations, acid burns from one fusion that incorporated chemical weaponry. The child chimera was last. Tucker stood outside the cell, unable to force himself to enter. Through the glass, the small figure watched him with an expression he could not read. Varn's augmentations had transformed the child into something designed for infiltration and assassination. Retractable blades beneath the fingernails, poison glands in the throat, enhanced speed and strength in a frame that appeared deceptively fragile. "This one is unnecessary," Tucker said. His voice came out hoarse from screaming. "She's already compliant." "Incorrect." Varn consulted a data slate. "Subject exhibits dangerous levels of self-awareness. She questions her purpose. Such doubt undermines unit cohesion. You will adjust her as you have the others." The cell door opened. Tucker stepped inside. The child did not move. She sat in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, watching him approach. "You're like my daddy," she said softly. "You hurt people and say it's for something good." Tucker froze. "I'm sorry." That's what he said too. She tilted her head, considering him with eyes too old for her face. "Before the mechanicum took us, before they made me into this." "I have to adjust you," Tucker said. "If I don't, they'll hurt us both." "I know." The child stood, small hands clenching into fists. Blades emerged from beneath her fingernails, glinting in the cell's harsh light. "It's okay. I understand." She attacked with the efficiency Varn's conditioning had instilled. No wasted movement. Every strike aimed at vital areas. Tucker barely managed to activate the circle before she could open his throat. The alchemical energy locked her in place mid-lunge, suspended above him like a deadly sculpture. Tucker reached up and placed his hand on her forehead. The neural adjustment was the deepest yet. He had to bury not just memories, but the capacity for self-reflection. Turn her into a pure instrument, incapable of questioning or doubt. As he worked, he felt her consciousness fragment. The girl who had loved her father despite his flaws, who had dreamed of growing up and choosing her own path, who had died in a mechanicum facility and been rebuilt as a weapon. All of it pressed down into darkness. When Tucker released the circle's power, the child dropped into a crouch. She looked at him with blank eyes, waiting for orders. Tucker stumbled out of the cell and vomited. Nothing came up but bile and blood. The servitors ignored him, already moving to the next phase of Varn's procedure. The Magos appeared, examining Tucker with evident satisfaction. "Excellent work. All specimens now function within acceptable parameters. We will begin combat trials within the hour." Tucker wiped his mouth. His hand came away bloody. "What trials?" "They will fight you." The words took a moment to process. "What?" "Psychological conditioning requires validation through practical application. Varn gestured, and servitors began herding the chimeras into a larger chamber. They have been programmed to attack their creator on command. This ensures loyalty to the Mechanicum supersedes any residual emotional attachment. The chimeras filed past Tucker into what he now recognized as an arena. 17 pairs of eyes tracked him with the focus of predators identifying prey. The neural adjustments had stripped away their individual hatred, replacing it with collective purpose. They would kill him because Varn commanded it, not from anger or desire for revenge, but simply because that was their function now. Servitors pushed Tucker into the arena, the doors sealed behind him with mechanical finality. The chimeras spread out surrounding him in a loose circle. They moved with coordination that should have required training, but instead came from Varn's programming. "Begin," the Magos commanded through voxcasters. The first chimera lunged, then the second. Within moments, all the 17 converged on Tucker in a coordinated assault. Claws and blades and teeth tore into him from every angle. He went down beneath their combined weight, drowning in a sea of violence he had enabled. His creations devoured him piece by piece, and Tucker understood this would not be the last time. Varn would allow him to heal, then repeat the process, testing the limits of the warp's mark, refining the chimera's efficiency, extracting data from every moment of suffering. Tucker had become not just the creator of monsters, but their eternal victim. Every fusion he performed would eventually turn on him, repaying his atrocity with measured violence. The assembly line of horror had made him its centerpiece. Through the blood and pain, Tucker caught glimpses of the child chimera. She tore into his flesh with the same efficiency she had shown during the adjustment. No hesitation, no recognition. Just perfect obedience to programming that had replaced her humanity. He had done this to her, to all of them. And unlike them, Tucker would remember every moment. The assault continued until Tucker stopped moving. His body lay broken in the arena's center, barely recognizable as human. But death would not come. The warp had claimed him for purposes beyond this torment. He would heal and wake and do it all again. Varn's voice echoed through the arena. Exceptional performance. Log all data. Prepare the subject for regeneration and schedule next trial in 12 hours. Production must accelerate. Lord Vex requires 300 combat-ready specimens within the month. 300. Tucker's consciousness flickered at the edge of darkness, unable to fully escape. 300 lives he would destroy. 300 monsters that would eventually turn on him. 300 iterations of this same nightmare. The servitors dragged his shattered body from the arena. Behind him, the chimeras stood in neat formation, awaiting their next command. Perfect weapons forged from suffering. Tools that would serve the Mechanicum's war until they broke or were broken. Tucker wished he could join them in their blank obedience. Anything would be better than the awareness that followed him even into unconsciousness. But the warp had marked him for punishment that transcended mere physical torment. He would remember everything, feel everything, understand exactly what he had become and what he had created. And there would be no escape. The Forge World's alarms began at the start of Tucker's 37th work cycle. He was drawing a transmutation circle when the first explosion shook the facility. The chalk line wavered, ruining the geometric perfection required for proper fusion. Tucker looked up from his room, from his work momentarily grateful for the interruption. Varn's voxcaster crackled to life across all channels. Xenos incursion detected. All personnel maintain stations. Defense protocols enacted. Tucker set down the chalk. Around him, servitors continued their tasks with mechanical indifference. The chimeras in their cells showed more reaction, turning toward the distant sounds of combat with predatory interest. Whatever attacked the Forge world had gotten past the outer defenses. A second explosion closer this time. The floor buckled. Support beams groaned under sudden stress. Tucker grabbed a workstation to keep from falling. Through the chamber's high windows, he glimpsed movement in the polluted sky. Ships, if they could be called that. Organic shapes that pulsed with bioluminescence descending through the toxic clouds like falling stars. The main doors burst inward. They came in a tide of chitin and altered flesh. Hybrids, Tucker realized. Human forms twisted by Xenos infection into something between species. 4 armed grotesques with elongated skulls. Smaller forms that skittered on too many legs. Hulking brutes whose musculature defied biological limits. And behind them, directing the swarm with telepathic precision, something massive and ancient. The Patriarch was larger than any of its brood. Its psychic presence preceded it like a pressure wave, making Tucker's head throb with sympathetic pain. 6 limbs ending in claws that could shred ceramite. A skull crowned with sensory organs that saw beyond visible spectrum. And behind those alien eyes, intelligence that had orchestrated countless planetary overthrows. The Genestealer cult swept through the chamber like a living flood. Servitors were torn apart in seconds, their augmented bodies no match for Xenos' fury. The chimeras howled from their cells, sensing kindred spirits in these other twisted forms. Tucker ran. Not toward escape, but deeper into the facility. Some animal instinct drove him away from the invaders, even though rational thought recognized the futility. There was nowhere to go. The Forge world was under siege. A hybrid intercepted him in the corridor, 3 arms and a distended jaw filled with needle teeth. It grabbed Tucker by the throat and lifted him off the ground. He clawed uselessly at its gripped legs, kicking empty air. The hybrid tilted its head, examining him with disturbing focus. Then it paused. Nostrils flared. Something in Tucker's scent, or aura, gave it pause. The Patriarch's psychic voice filled Tucker's skull like oil poured into his brain. Marked by the warp, tainted by transmutation. You are interesting. The hybrid released Tucker. He collapsed, gasping. Before he could recover, 3 more hybrids surrounded him. They did not attack. Instead, they grabbed his arms and legs with surprising gentleness, lifting him between them like pallbearers carrying a corpse. They bore him through the facility's lower levels. The invasion continued above servitors and tech priests falling to the cult's coordinated assault. Tucker glimpsed Varn, briefly the Magos, directing automated defenses with mechanical efficiency. Then a blast door sealed, cutting off that section. The hybrids descended into levels Tucker had never accessed. The architecture changed, becoming less industrial and more organic. Walls showed signs of biomass integration, flesh growing through metal. The air grew thick with pheromones that made Tucker's head swim. They emerged into a vast chamber that had been hollowed from the Forge world's foundation. A gene pit, where the cult performed its own transmutations. Vats of mutagenic fluid lined the walls, each one containing subjects in various stages of transformation. Some were still recognizably human. Others had progressed far enough to show the full extent of Xenos integration. The Patriarch waited at the chamber's center, squatting on a raised dais of fused bone and metal. Its psychic attention focused on Tucker with uncomfortable intensity. Your memories taste of guilt and desperation. The voice bypassed Tucker's ears entirely, forming directly in his consciousness. You destroyed your offspring, made weapons from innocence. We approve. Tucker tried to form a response. His throat would not cooperate. The cult offers purpose to the purposeless. The patriarch's claws scraped against the dais. You will create for us fusions that serve the star children. In return, we grant you family. One of the vats drained. The subject within stumbled forward, held upright by attending hybrids. Female human features still dominant despite the beginning of Xenos integration. She looked at Tucker with eyes that held desperate hope. "Please," she whispered. "My children? They took my children. They said if I cooperate, I can be with them again." Tucker understood immediately. The cult's promise mirrored Varn's lie. Join us, work for us, and receive back what you lost. It was always a lie. But the woman believed it, just as Tucker had believed the Magos. "Show him the price of refusal," the patriarch commanded. Hybrids dragged another subject forward. This one was male further along in his transformation. 4 arms sprouted from a torso that had been split and reformed. His face showed the elongation characteristic of advanced infection. But his eyes were human enough to communicate absolute terror. The patriarch placed a claw on the subject's skull. The man began to scream. Tucker watched as the transformation accelerated far beyond natural progression. Flesh bubbled and split. Bones cracked and reformed. The man's humanity was stripped away, layer by layer, replaced with Xenos biology that consumed him from within. His consciousness remained throughout, trapped in a body that no longer answered to human commands. When the transformation completed, what remained bore no resemblance to the man. It was pure hybrid, all alien instinct and bioweapon efficiency. The patriarch released it, and the creature immediately attacked the woman, tearing into her with mindless hunger. Hybrids restrained the creature before it could kill her. The woman collapsed, bleeding from multiple wounds. She looked at Tucker with betrayed understanding. This was the fate that awaited her children if she failed to serve adequately. "You comprehend," the patriarch said, with something approaching satisfaction. "Work and receive gentler treatment. Refuse and experience transformation beyond your limited alchemy scope." Tucker was placed on an operating table that pulsed with living tissue. Restraints grew from the surface, wrapping around his limbs like organic rope. Attendant hybrids brought forward specimens, human captives alongside Xenos organisms. The patriarch wanted fusions that combined Tucker's alchemical methodology with cult genetics. "Begin." Tucker drew his first circle on the living table. The surface responded to the chalk channels forming to guide alchemical energy. The cult had prepared for this, shaping their gene pit to accommodate his technique. The first fusion paired a young man with an organism that resembled an oversized tick. Tucker activated the transmutation and watched biology rewrite itself according to unholy specifications. The result was ambulatory but barely sentient, more weapon than being. The patriarch's approval radiated through the chamber like warm approval. "Continue. Faster. We require many." Hours blurred together. Tucker performed fusion after fusion, his hands moving through familiar patterns even as his mind recoiled. The cult's pheromones saturated the air, affecting his perception. Time became elastic. He could not tell if minutes or days had passed. Some fusions succeeded. Others failed catastrophically, subjects dying mid-transmutation or emerging as non-viable horrors. The patriarch absorbed the failures, literally consuming them to reclaim genetic material. Nothing was wasted in the gene pit. Tucker began to recognize faces among the subjects. Tech priests captured during the invasion, Servitors partially disassembled for easier integration. Even some of Varn's chimeras recovered from their cells and repurposed for cult experimentation. The child chimera was brought forward. She no longer showed any recognition. Varn's conditioning had buried her consciousness too deep, but her small body was ideal for integration with a juvenile Xeno specimen the hybrids had cultivated for stealth operations. Tucker hesitated. His hands refused to draw the circle. The Patriarch's psychic pressure increased, crushing down on Tucker's consciousness like a physical weight. "Obey." Tucker picked up the chalk. His hand shook so badly, the first line came out crooked. He erased it and tried again. The circle took shape despite his resistance muscle memory, overriding moral objection. The child and the Xeno specimen were positioned. Tucker activated the array. Alchemical energy merged with cult genetics, producing something that belonged to neither source. The child's screams cut off abruptly as her vocal cords reshaped themselves. What emerged was efficient and deadly, perfect for the infiltration missions the Patriarch had planned. The child's face was still partially recognizable, which made it worse. She looked at Tucker with alien eyes before the hybrids led her away for conditioning. Tucker vomited across the living table. The surface absorbed the bile feeding on it. "Adequate progress," the Patriarch declared, "but insufficient speed. We will accelerate your cooperation." Hybrids brought forward a device that resembled a cage made from bone and sinew. They forced Tucker into it, and the structure sealed around him. Organic needles pierced his flesh at dozens of points, injecting something that burned like acid. Tucker felt the infection take root. Xenos genetic material invaded his cells, beginning the transformation process. His body fought back the warp's mark, preventing full integration. The result was agony that existed on both physical and genetic levels. "You will become what you create," the Patriarch said. Hybrid flesh bonded to warp-touched essence. The fusion will not complete, but the process will continue indefinitely. Pain will be your constant companion until you produce what we require. The infection spread through Tucker's body in waves. His skin erupted with chitinous growths that immediately cracked and bled. Extra limbs tried to sprout from his torso, only to be rejected by his existing biology. The battle between Xenos genetics and warp corruption turned his flesh into a battlefield. Through the haze of pain, Tucker continued working. The Patriarch would not allow him rest or death. Subjects were brought forward in steady stream. Each fusion added another atrocity to Tucker's ledger. Each success fueled the cult's invasion of the Forge world above. He lost count of how many transmutations he performed. 50, 100. The number ceased to matter. He was a tool wielded by forces that cared nothing for his suffering or conscience. The woman from earlier was brought forward again. Her wounds had been treated, infection prevented. The Patriarch wanted her functional for future use. She looked at Tucker with hollow eyes that no longer held hope or accusation, just acceptance of their shared damnation. "My children are already gone, aren't they?" she asked softly. Tucker could not answer. The truth would serve no purpose beyond additional cruelty. "It's all right," she continued. "I understand now. There's no escape, no reward. Just endless service until we break." She was positioned in a fresh circle. Tucker drew the pattern automatically, hands moving without conscious direction. Another fusion. Another weapon for the cult. Another piece of his soul ground into dust. The transformation took her quickly. When it finished, she no longer remembered having children. The Patriarch's genetic conditioning had stripped away her humanity along with her memories. She was reborn as hybrid loyal only to the Star Children, who had consumed everything she once was. Tucker watched her disappear into the gene pit's depths, following other successful fusions toward whatever mission the cult had planned. He wondered if Nina had felt this same hollowness when she realized her father had destroyed her. If she had experienced this moment of recognition that no apology or explanation could undo the violation. The infection in Tucker's body intensified. More needles pierced his flesh, injecting fresh genetic material. The Xeno's transformation fought against the warp's mark in an eternal stalemate. Neither could destroy the other. Tucker existed in the space between experiencing both forms of corruption simultaneously. Above, the battle for the Forge world raged on. Tucker caught fragments of information through the Patriarch's psychic presence. The cult was winning overwhelming Mechanicum defenses through sheer numbers and coordination. Soon they would control the entire facility, and Tucker would continue working. For the cult now, instead of for Varn. Different masters, same slavery. Different promises, same lies. The assembly line of horror simply changed ownership. The Patriarch loomed over him, massive form blocking out the gene pit's bioluminescent lighting. You serve well. When the Forge world falls, we will reward you. A new daughter grown from genetic material we have harvested. She will be perfect, flawless, everything you failed to preserve. Tucker looked up at the alien intelligence wearing false compassion like a mask. He recognized the lie, but could not reject it. Just as with Varn's promise, the fantasy was all he had left to sustain him. So he nodded and reached for the chalk to draw another circle. The hybrids brought forward the next subjects, and Tucker continued his work in the depths of the gene pit, creating abominations for masters who would never release him, pursuing promises that would never materialize, trapped in a cycle that would repeat until the universe itself ended. His hands moved. The circles formed. The fusions continued. And somewhere deep in Tucker's fragmenting consciousness, Nina watched and wept. The warp opened in the gene pit, 3 cycles after the cult claimed victory. Tucker was working when reality split. The transmutation circle he had drawn began to pulse with colors that did not belong in material space. Green and brown and black, all of them wrong in ways that made his eyes water. The subjects positioned for fusion began to rot before the alchemical energy could activate. The Patriarch sensed it first. Its psychic presence recoiled alien mind, recognizing something that transcended even Xeno's understanding. The hybrids fell back from the expanding rift, chittering in distress. Flies emerged from the wound in space. Not ordinary insects, but creatures the size of human fists, their bodies bloated with disease. They filled the gene pit in seconds, crawling over every surface, investigating the cult's works with malevolent curiosity. Tucker felt the presence before he saw it. Something vast beyond comprehension pushed through from the other side, not entering fully, but extending a fragment of itself into material reality. The temperature rose. The air grew thick with spores and moisture. Every breath carried the taste of sweet decay. The Plague Father manifested as a mass of putrescent flesh, barely contained within vaguely humanoid shape. Antlers sprouted from a head that was more wound than face. Its body wept fluids from sores that never healed. Despite the horror of its form, the entity radiated an unsettling warmth. Affection twisted into something incomprehensible to unaltered minds. "Oh my," it said, voice bubbling up from liquid lungs. "What do we have here?" The Patriarch attempted to assert dominance through psychic force. The Plague Father laughed a sound like drowning in honey. Little Star Child thinks it's special. One bloated hand waved dismissively. But you're just another flavor of change. Grandfather loves all his children, even the ones who don't know they're his yet. The entity's attention settled on Tucker. Those eyes clustered around empty sockets, focused with terrible gentleness. You're the artist everyone's been fighting over. The one who makes such beautiful broken things. Tucker tried to back away. His legs would not respond. The infection the cult had seeded throughout his body suddenly flared, responding to the Plague Father's presence. Pustules erupted across his skin, bursting and reforming in rapid cycles. The Mechanicum wanted to use you. The Star Children wanted to own you. But they all missed the point. The Plague Father drifted closer, trailing flies and spores. You're already perfect? A soul so thoroughly corrupted it can't die. A body marked by the warp, but poisoned by Xenos taint. And such delicious guilt. A finger swollen and dripping touched Tucker's forehead. The contact burned cold. Grandfather sees your potential. Not as a tool, as art. Power flooded into Tucker's body, not healing or transformation, but something worse. An alteration that worked on fundamental levels, rewriting the rules his biology followed. The Xenos infection that had battled his warp corruption suddenly found common ground, both fusing into something new and terrible. Tucker's skin split along old scars. The wounds did not bleed. Instead, they wept fluids the color of spoiled milk. The edges refused to close, remaining open to expose muscle that glistened with unnatural moisture. His nervous system rewired itself, every nerve ending becoming hypersensitive to sensation. There we are, the Plague Father cooed. Now you'll feel everything properly? Every little moment of decay, every stage of corruption, all of it preserved in perfect clarity. Tucker's vision fractured. Additional eyes opened across his body in places that should not support sensory organs. They grew from his shoulders, his chest, the backs of his hands. Each one saw the world differently, layering perspectives, until reality became a kaleidoscope of horror. With the new vision came new awareness. Tucker could see the microscopic level of his own corruption. Bacteria colonies establishing themselves in his tissues. Viral particles rewriting his cellular structure. Fungal networks spreading through his cardiovascular system. All of it happening simultaneously, never quite killing him, never allowing him to stabilize. You wanted to create life, the Plague Father said. Now you are life, a whole ecosystem. Thousands of organisms living in beautiful harmony inside your failing shell. Tucker tried to speak. His throat had closed with growth that might have been tumor or parasite. The sound that emerged was wet and incomprehensible. No need for words. Grandfather understands. The entity patted Tucker's head with affection that left handprint-shaped lesions. You're going to help us spread joy throughout this whole facility. Every fusion you make from now on will carry our blessings. Every creation will be touched by Grandfather's love. The Patriarch attempted intervention's psychic assault, targeting the Plague Father with lethal intent. The entity simply absorbed the attack, incorporating it into its mass. Star Child is upset. That's all right. Change is difficult for those who can't embrace it fully. The Plague Father gestured, and rot spread through the gene pit like wildfire. The organic walls began to decay, flesh sloughing from metal. The vats of mutagenic fluid curdled their contents, spoiling into toxic sludge. Hybrids caught in the corruption collapsed their enhanced bodies, unable to process the aggressive infection. The patriarch fled, taking what remained of its brood deeper into the Forge world's depths. The Plague Father did not pursue. It had already claimed its prize. "Now then," it said, turning back to Tucker. "Let's see what you can make with proper inspiration." Subjects were brought forward, not by hybrids this time, but by shambling figures that had once been mechanicum servitors. The rot had claimed them during the Plague Father's arrival, transforming them into plague bearers. They moved with jerky motions, bodies falling apart and reforming with each step. Tucker was released from his restraints. He collapsed immediately, legs unable to support his corrupted weight. The additional eyes showed him his own body from multiple angles. Skin like cottage cheese, muscles visible through gaps in flesh, bones showing through in places already pitted with decay. "Up you get," the Plague Father encouraged. "Work to do. So much work." Tucker crawled to the nearest transmutation circle. The pattern was already corrupted lines twisted into new configurations by the entity's presence. When he tried to draw corrections, his hands left trails of pus that burned through the floor. The first subject was placed in the circle. A tech priest, his augmentations already failing, as decay worked through the holy machine-flesh interface. Tucker activated the transmutation more through instinct than conscious thought. What emerged was beyond either alchemical or biological understanding. The fusion incorporated elements of machine, human, and disease into something that should not function. Yet it moved animated by principles that defied material physics. Its purpose was not combat or labor, but propagation, spreading Nurgle's gifts to everything it touched. The Plague Father clapped with delight. Magnificent again more. Tucker worked through fever and delirium. Each fusion he created carried the blessing, becoming vectors for corruption that would spread throughout the Forge world. The subjects went willingly, drawn by the Plague Father's aura of false comfort. They smiled as Tucker transformed them, seeing transcendence where only damnation waited. Hours or days passed. Tucker could not track time through his fragmented perception. The additional eyes showed him things happening in multiple moments simultaneously. Past transmutations overlaying current work, future corruptions, bleeding back into present awareness. His consciousness struggled to process the temporal distortion. The Plague Father remained throughout, offering encouragement in its bubbling voice, praising each successful fusion, consoling Tucker when transformations failed to achieve sufficient corruption. The entity's presence was constant and smothering, like drowning in affection that had gone septic. "You're doing so well," it said after Tucker completed his 100th fusion. "Grandfather is very proud. You've created such diversity and decay. No two corruptions alike." Tucker looked at his hands. They were barely recognizable as human. Fingers had split into tendrils that wept continuously. The bones showed through translucent skin. Every movement left pieces of himself behind, shed cells that immediately spawned new infections. "I want to die," Tucker managed to whisper through his ruined throat. "Oh, no, no, no." The Plague Father's tone was genuinely distressed. "That's the guilt talking. You don't really want oblivion. You want purpose, meaning. And Grandfather has given you that." One massive hand cupped Tucker's face, forcing him to look into those clustered eyes. "You are deathless now. Not because you can't die, but because death has become irrelevant. You exist in the space between living and rot. Every moment is an ending and a beginning. You are the cycle made manifest." Tucker felt his consciousness fragment further. Part of him understood this was corruption beyond anything he had experienced. But another part, worn down by endless torment, recognized the strange mercy in the Plague Father's words. If death was impossible, if suffering was eternal, perhaps acceptance was the only option. That's it, the entity encouraged, sensing Tucker's resistance crumbling. Let go. Embrace the decay. You've been fighting so hard for so long. Isn't it exhausting? It was exhausting. Tucker was tired beyond comprehension. Tired of guilt. Tired of punishment. Tired of serving masters who promised redemption while delivering only fresh horrors. The Plague Father's blessing offered something different. Not redemption or escape, but a framework where his suffering had purpose. Every fusion spread Grandfather's love. Every corruption advanced the cycle. His crimes became service. His torment became worship. Tucker reached for the next subject. His movements were automatic now, hands drawing circles without conscious direction. The transmutation completed before he realized he had started it. Another vector created. Another blessing spread. Beautiful. The Plague Father sighed with genuine appreciation. You're finally understanding. Pain is just sensation. Decay is just change. And Grandfather loves all change, even when it hurts. The forge world above had become a garden of pestilence. Tucker's corrupted fusions spread through every level, transforming mechanicum technology and cult biology alike into vectors for Nurgle's domain. The facility was dying, but death here meant rebirth into something new and terrible. Tucker worked at the center of it all, artist and canvas both. His body continued its decay, shedding pieces that grew into new infections. His consciousness fragmented across multiple awareness streams, experiencing his own corruption from every angle his additional eyes provided. Time lost meaning entirely. Tucker might have been working for hours or centuries. The Plague Father remained constant, encouraging every fusion, celebrating every corruption, offering affection that was genuine despite being fundamentally incomprehensible. You've done so well, the entity said during a moment when Tucker's consciousness briefly unified. But there's one more gift Grandfather wants to give you. The Plague Father placed both hands on Tucker's shoulders. Power flooded through the contact more intense than anything before. Tucker felt his biology rewrite itself at quantum levels. The decay that had been progressing stopped. Not healed. Simply frozen at the exact moment of maximum suffering. His wounds would never close. His flesh would never heal or die completely. The infections would continue their cycles without ever achieving resolution. He was locked in perpetual corruption, unable to progress forward or backward. Now you're perfect, the Plague Father declared. Eternal decay, infinite sensation. You'll carry Grandfather's blessings, forever spreading joy wherever you go. Tucker tried to scream. The sound emerged as gurgling laughter, his corrupted vocal cords incapable of expressing horror anymore. That's the spirit, the entity said, misunderstanding entirely. You're happy, I can tell. Everyone who receives Grandfather's ultimate gifts is happy eventually. The Plague Father began to withdraw its form, pulling it back toward the warp rift. Before it disappeared entirely, it turned back to offer final blessing. Don't worry about being alone. Grandfather is always watching his special children. And when the time comes, we'll have more work for you. So many worlds need your particular talents. The rift sealed. The Forge world fell silent, save for the sounds of ongoing corruption. Tucker knelt in the transformed gene pit, surrounded by the results of his work. Dozens of plague bearers shambled through the facility, spreading infection to every surface they touched. He looked at his hands, barely recognizable as such. The additional eyes across his body all focused inward, showing him every detail of his corruption from impossible angles. He was a walking exhibition of decay, a living artwork that would never be completed because completion would mean ending, and he could not end. The warp had marked him for eternal punishment. The Xenos had infected him with undying biology. Nurgle had blessed him with perpetual corruption. Three forces combined to ensure Tucker would exist forever in this state, unable to die, unable to heal, unable to escape awareness of what he had become. He reached for chalk to draw another circle. The motion was automatic muscle memory overriding conscious thought. There was nothing else to do. No other purpose. Only the work continuing forever, creating corruptions that spread grandfather's love, whether he wanted to or not. Tucker drew the pattern and waited for the next subject. The cycle would continue. The decay would spread. And somewhere in the fragments of his shattered consciousness, Nina's ghost watched her father finally receive the eternity he had always deserved. The warp came for Tucker during what might have been his 1000th fusion. He was working in the ruins of the gene pit hands, moving through patterns that had become reflex. The subject before him was already half consumed by Nurgle's blessings, flesh rippling with infection. Tucker activated the circle and watched biology rewrite itself, according to principles that defied natural law. Reality cracked, not slowly like the previous warp incursions. This was surgical and deliberate. A fissure opened directly above Tucker edges, sharp as broken glass. No light emerged from the wound, only absence. A void so complete it hurt to perceive. The transmutation circle flickered and died. The subject collapsed, transformation incomplete body, caught between states. Tucker looked up at the fissure and felt recognition that transcended his fragmented consciousness. This was judgment. The entity that emerged bore no resemblance to the Plague Father's grotesque warmth. It had no form that Tucker's multiple eyes could properly focus on. Sometimes it appeared as a mass of children's faces all screaming. Sometimes as a geometric impossibility that existed in more dimensions than space could contain. Sometimes as nothing at all, just the suggestion of presence that made his corrupted nervous system shriek with sympathetic agony. It spoke without words. Concepts forced directly into Tucker's mind, bypassing language entirely. Guilt made manifest. Suffering incomplete. Judgment deferred too long. Tucker tried to back away. His decaying legs would not respond. The entity's attention pinned him like a specimen on a board, unable to move or look away. You destroyed innocence, twisted love into horror, made weapons from those who trusted you. Images flooded Tucker's consciousness. Nina before the transmutation, her smile when she called him daddy, her trust absolute and pure, the kind only children possess. Then, the betrayal, the circle drawn around her. The moment she understood what was happening. Her final thoughts before the transformation consumed her identity. But these were not Tucker's memories. They were hers. The entity was showing him his crime from the victim's perspective, forcing him to experience the violation he had inflicted. Tucker's mouth opened. No sound emerged. His corrupted throat had finally failed completely, vocal cords dissolved by Nurgle's blessings. Words are unnecessary. You had your chances to speak, to apologize, to choose differently. Those moments have passed. The entity reached down. Its touch was nothing like the Plague Father's diseased affection or Varn's clinical precision. This contact was absolute and final. Tucker felt his body begin to change, but not through transmutation or corruption. This was something more fundamental. His legs fused together, bone and muscle merging into a single mass. The fusion continued upward, consuming his torso, eliminating the distinction between limbs and body. His arms pressed against his sides and began to sink into his flesh, absorbed into the growing mass. Tucker tried to resist. His consciousness screamed against the transformation. The entity ignored his protests, working with the patience of something that existed outside time's constraints. The additional eyes Nurgle had given him began to close one by one, not healing shut, but sealing themselves permanently behind layers of scar tissue. His vision dimmed as each perspective was stripped away until only his original eyes remained. Then those began to change as well. The lids fused open, ensuring he could never look away or find respite in darkness. But the eyes themselves went blind to external stimuli. Instead, they turned inward, showing Tucker only himself. Every moment of corruption playing an endless loop, every fusion he had created replaying with perfect fidelity, every victim's final thoughts accessible in horrible detail. You will see only what you have done. No new input, no distraction, only your crimes reviewed eternally. Tucker's mouth sealed shut, not like his throat through decay, but through deliberate fusion. Lips merged with the flesh around them, eliminating any possibility of speech. His tongue dissolved, reducing to a useless mass that served only to remind him of communication's absence. The entity continued its work with terrible thoroughness. Tucker's ears sealed next, cutting off all external sound, but internal noise amplified. The beating of his corrupted heart, the flow of infected blood through failing vessels, the whisper of bacteria colonies consuming his tissues. All of it became deafeningly loud, drowning out any chance of silence. His sense of touch remained, enhanced even by Nurgle's alterations. But now it reported only internal sensations. The progression of decay through his organs. The battle between warp corruption and Xeno's infection in his cells. The frozen moment of maximum suffering that the Plague Father had imposed, experienced with absolute clarity in every nerve ending. You wanted to create, to transform, to make life serve your purposes. Tucker's body compressed further, folding in on itself in ways that should have been impossible. Bones broke and reformed. Organs shifted into new configurations. His physical form was being reduced to its essential components, stripped of anything that might provide distraction or relief. Now you will be creation, eternal and unchanging. Your existence will serve as warning and monument. The transformation reached its conclusion. Tucker existed now as a roughly spherical mass, perhaps a meter in diameter. Flesh and corruption and warp essence compressed into a form that pulsed with perpetual suffering. No limbs to move, no mouth to scream, no eyes that saw anything except his own crimes on infinite repeat. But consciousness remained, perfect and undiminished. Every aspect of Tucker's awareness preserved in the prison of his transformed body. He could think, could remember, could understand exactly what he had become and why. The entity was not finished. It reached into the compressed mass and pulled out something invisible to physical perception. Tucker's capacity for hope. The entity examined it briefly, then crushed it to nothing. The psychological anchor that had kept Tucker searching for redemption or escape vanished, leaving only awareness of his permanent state. Next went his ability to rationalize, the mental flexibility that let humans justify their actions, reframe their crimes, tell themselves comfortable lies. Gone. Tucker was left with only brutal honesty about his nature and choices. Finally, the entity extracted Tucker's sense of time, the subjective experience that made moments pass, that allowed consciousness to flow from one instant to the next. Without it, Tucker existed in every moment simultaneously. Past, present, and future collapsed into an eternal now, where every second of suffering happened at once and forever. The punishment fits the crime. You made your daughter into a thing that could not speak its pain. Now you cannot speak yours. She was transformed into something that served only your purpose. Now you serve only as example. The entity lifted Tucker's compressed form. The forge world fell away, its corruption-soaked corridors growing distant. They rose through layers of reality, passing through the material world into spaces between. The warp opened around them, but not the chaotic maelstrom Tucker had fallen through initially. This was a different region. A pocket dimension carved from the Imperium's substance, shaped by the entity's will into something specific. A prison. The space was featureless and infinite. No landmarks, no reference points, just endless void stretching in all directions. The entity placed Tucker's form at the pocket dimension's center and stepped back. Here you will remain. No escape, no change, no end. Other forms drifted in the void. Tucker's internal vision recognized them, even though his eyes could not see. Other souls trapped in eternal punishment. War criminals who had committed atrocities beyond measure. Torturers who had refined suffering into art. Those who had betrayed innocence for personal gain. But Tucker was different. The others were dead, their consciousness preserved post-mortem for judgment. He was alive, trapped in a body that would never die, because 3 separate corruptions had rendered him immortal. His punishment would continue long after the universe aged and cooled. Long after the warp itself changed beyond recognition. Forever, in the most literal sense. The entity's presence began to withdraw, having completed its work. Before it departed entirely, it left one final message. Your daughter forgave you before she died. She understood you were broken and desperate. But forgiveness does not negate consequence. This is not revenge. This is justice. Then Tucker was alone. The silence was absolute. No external stimuli reached him. His sealed ears heard only his body's internal processes. His blind eyes showed only the replay of his crimes. His consciousness existed in every moment, simultaneously experiencing his eternal imprisonment in parallel across infinite timelines. He tried to move. His compressed form had no limbs, no way to navigate. He floated in the void, unable to affect his position or orientation. He tried to speak. His sealed mouth produced nothing. No sound. No vibration. Not even the ghost of communication. He tried to think his way out. To find loopholes in the entity's judgment. To rationalize how this punishment was excessive or unfair, but his capacity for self-deception had been removed. He could only acknowledge the truth. He had done this to himself through choices made freely. Every transmutation, every betrayal, every moment he chose cowardice over courage. Nina's face appeared in his internal vision. Not the chimera, not the ghost that had haunted him through the warp. Just Nina as she had been. Smiling, trusting, calling him daddy with absolute faith that he would protect her. Then the memory shifted to her transformation. Tucker experienced it from her perspective, as he had countless times since the entity's judgment began. Felt her confusion as the circle activated. Her fear as her body began to change. her desperate hope that Daddy would stop it, her realization that he would not. Her final moment of consciousness before the chimera's instincts consumed her human awareness. The memory looped, started again, played through with perfect fidelity, would continue playing forever along with every other crime Tucker had committed. An infinite archive of atrocity displayed exclusively for the perpetrator's review. Tucker wanted to weep. His corrupted body had no tear ducts, no mechanism for expressing grief. The emotion built inside him with nowhere to go, adding another layer to his suffering. He wanted to beg forgiveness. His sealed mouth could not form words. The apology he had never properly given Nina remained trapped inside him, unspoken and unspeakable. He wanted to die. The three corruptions sustaining him denied that mercy. Warp Essence Xenos infection and Nurgle's blessing combined to ensure his consciousness would persist regardless of any damage. He was deathless in the most horrible way possible. Time passed. Or did not pass. Tucker's subjective experience made the distinction meaningless. He existed in every moment of his punishment simultaneously. The first second, the millionth year, the heat death of the universe. All of it happening at once, a single eternal instant of comprehensive suffering. Other souls drifted near him occasionally. They could not communicate, could not offer companionship. Just proximity in the void. Fellow prisoners serving their own sentences. Tucker tried to count the repetitions of Nina's transformation, lost track immediately, tried to measure the duration of his imprisonment. Found the attempt futile without linear time, tried to imagine an end to his punishment. Could not, because the entity had made clear there would be none. This was eternity, true and absolute. Not hyperbole or metaphor. Tucker would exist in this state forever, conscious and aware, experiencing every moment of his suffering with perfect clarity, unable to adapt or acclimate or find peace. The crimes against his daughter played on endless loop. The fusions he had created for Varn marched through his awareness in sequence. The cult's corrupted specimens displayed themselves for review. The plague-bearers he had birthed under Nurgle's guidance spread their infections across his internal vision. Every victim, every moment of their suffering, every consequence of his choices. All of it preserved and presented in perpetual exhibition. Tucker tried to find mercy in the entity's final message. Nina had forgiven him. That should mean something. Should provide comfort or redemption. But forgiveness did not undo what he had done, did not restore what he had destroyed, did not erase the suffering he had caused. Nina's forgiveness was grace she had chosen to extend, not absolution he had earned. And the punishment was not about revenge. The entity had been clear. This was consequence. The natural result of his actions, amplified and made eternal. He had transformed his daughter into something that existed only to serve his needs. Now he was transformed into something that existed only to exemplify justice. The parallel was exact and intentional. Tucker had made Nina into a chimera that could not communicate its suffering. Now he was a monument that could not express his regret. She had been trapped in a body that no longer answered to her will. He was trapped in a form that permitted no action whatsoever. She had existed as his creation, defined entirely by his choices. He existed now as Justice's creation, defined entirely by his crimes. The symmetry was perfect, and would remain perfect forever. Tucker drifted in the void, compressed into a sphere of suffering, blind to everything, except his crimes, deaf to everything, except his corruption, mute forever. to the apology that would never reach its intended recipient. Somewhere in the depths of his fragmented consciousness, a thought formed. Not hope, because that had been taken from him. Not despair, because even that required some sense of future possibility. Just awareness. Pure and simple. This was what he deserved, and it would never end. The void stretched infinite in all directions. The replay of his crimes continued without pause. The punishment persisted eternal and unchanging, exactly as the entity had designed. Tucker had wanted to apologize, to explain himself, to somehow make things right through words or penance or sacrifice. But some crimes transcended apology. Some violations could not be undone through suffering or remorse. Some choices led to consequences that existed outside the possibility of redemption. He had made his daughter into a monster. Now he was one. Not through transformation or corruption, but through recognition of what he had always been. A man who chose selfishness over love, cowardice over courage, his own comfort over his child's life. The monster was not the chimera. It was the Creator, had always been the Creator, and now the Creator would exist eternally as monument to his own monstrosity, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die, unable to escape awareness of exactly what he was and what he had done. The void held him suspended. The silence pressed in from all sides. The replay continued perfect and perpetual. Tucker had no mouth, and he must scream. But his screams would never reach anyone, would never provide catharsis or communication, would only echo inside his compressed form, adding their noise to the symphony of suffering that would continue forever. This was the writhing apology. Not spoken or written, but embodied. Tucker himself was the apology twisted into permanent expression of remorse that could never be delivered or accepted. He existed. He suffered. He would continue existing and suffering until existence itself ended, and perhaps beyond even that. The punishment had no conclusion, because some crimes deserved none. And in the eternal void, Tucker finally understood what his daughter had known from the moment he drew the transmutation circle around her. That love once betrayed so completely left consequences that echoed forever.